Everyone believed the billionaire's baby would never see the light of day. The doctors said his eyes were beyond help, specialists gave up, and even his father stopped hoping. For months, the child lived in silence, blind to the world around him, never smiling, never reaching for a face he couldn't see. The mansion that once echoed with laughter became a house of sorrow. Then, one morning, a new maid arrived. She wasn't a doctor, she wasn't a nurse, just a quiet woman carrying her own pain. But the moment she touched the child, something happened, something no one could explain. From that day on, the truth that had been hidden for months began to slowly come to light. The sea wind blew gently through the tall windows of the Carter mansion, carrying the faint sound of waves. Inside, the air was heavy. David Carter stood by the crib, his suit jacket hanging loose, his face pale from sleepless nights. His son, little Noah, lay still, staring into nothing. The boy's eyes were open but lifeless, like a glass doll that couldn't see or feel. Every morning was the same. David spoke softly, read stories, played music, anything to draw a reaction, but nothing ever came. The doctors had said it again and again. "Your son was born blind, sir. There is nothing we can do." Those words replayed in his mind every night. He could buy companies, build skyscrapers, control empires, but he could not give his child sight. The mansion had grown quiet since his wife's plane crashed. Her laughter was gone, her touch gone, her warmth gone. Only Noah remained, and even he seemed trapped in another world. The staff moved carefully, afraid to make noise, afraid to speak unless spoken to. It was as if grief itself had rules inside that house. That morning, a car stopped at the gate. The new maid arrived with a small brown bag and tired eyes. Her name was Emma. She spoke little, her steps slow, her shoulders slightly bent as if she carried a weight no one could see. The head housekeeper showed her around the hallways, the kitchen, the laundry room, and then pointed toward the nursery. "Your main duty will be helping with the child," the housekeeper said, her voice low. "Just follow the schedule. Mr. Carter doesn't like surprises." Emma nodded. When she entered the nursery, her breath caught. The room was beautiful, painted soft blue, filled with expensive toys that had never been touched. A small crib stood by the window, sunlight falling across the baby's face, but he didn't blink. He didn't move. She stepped closer and whispered, "Hello, little one." No response. She placed her bag on a chair and slowly reached out. Her fingers brushed the baby's small hand. It was warm, soft, but limp. Still, she smiled. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I'll be here with you." From that moment, something stirred inside her. The sight of the child brought back her own memories, the hospital room, the stillness of her own baby's face, the ache that never left. She had taken this job to forget, but looking at Noah, she felt both pain and purpose. That afternoon, while cleaning, she heard faint footsteps outside. David was passing by, phone in hand, giving short answers to someone. When his eyes met Emma's, he gave a polite nod, no smile, then disappeared into his office. He looked like a man who hadn't felt sunlight in years. Later that evening, as the mansion grew quiet again, Emma prepared to bathe Noah. She filled a small basin with warm water, testing it with her wrist. The baby lay on a soft towel, silent as always. She spoke softly as she washed him, humming an old song her mother used to sing. Then it happened. A tiny drop of soap slid down the cloth, landing near Noah's eye. He blinked. Emma froze. She thought she imagined it. But then he blinked again, a small, slow movement, like a whisper of life. Her heart raced, but she said nothing. "It's okay, little one," she murmured, her voice shaking. "It's just water." When she rinsed his face, she noticed something else. His eyes followed the motion of the cloth. Just for a second, she stopped breathing. Could it be? No. The doctors said he couldn't see. Maybe it was reflex, maybe it was nothing. But deep inside, she felt something strange, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. After she dressed him, she sat beside the crib and watched quietly. Noah made a faint sound, almost like a sigh. His lips moved slightly, as if trying to form a word. Emma leaned closer, her eyes filling with tears. "Can you hear me?" she whispered. Silence. She waited, but there was nothing more. Still, that small blink refused to leave her mind. She wrote it down in a small notebook she carried. He blinked today, after soap touched his face. The next morning, the routine repeated. The house woke early, staff moving like shadows through the halls. David spent most of his time locked in his study. Emma entered the nursery again, sunlight flooding through the curtains. Noah was lying still, his tiny chest rising and falling. As she wiped his face gently, she whispered again, "Good morning, Angel." Then she moved her hand slowly before his face, left to right. For a brief moment, his eyes seemed to follow. Her heart trembled. She smiled through tears. "I see you trying," she said softly. "I know you can." When David came to check on his son later, she didn't mention it. She wanted to be sure before saying a word. He stood by the crib, quiet, looking down at Noah with tired eyes. "Has he eaten?" David asked. "Yes, sir," she replied softly. "He ate a little." He nodded and turned to leave, but then paused. "You don't have to spend too much time in here," he said, his tone distant. "It won't change anything." Emma looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it might, sir. Sometimes even silence listens." He gave her a confused look, then walked away. That night, Emma sat in her small room, staring at the ocean through the window. She couldn't sleep. The sound of waves mixed with the memory of Noah's blink. Her hands trembled as she held her notebook again. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing: something about that baby wasn't what everyone believed. The truth was waiting, hidden in the smallest movements, in the quietest moments. And Emma was the only one who had noticed it. The next morning came with the sound of distant seagulls and the low hum of waves against the rocks below the mansion. Emma stood by the nursery window, the sunlight spreading gently across the floor. Noah was lying in his crib, quiet as always, his small hands resting on the blanket, but Emma couldn't stop thinking about what had happened the day before. That blink, that small, almost impossible movement that no one else had ever seen. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Good morning, little one." Her voice was calm, but her heart was not. She gently lifted Noah from the crib and carried him to the table near the window. The light touched his face, and she thought she saw his eyelids move again. Maybe she imagined it, maybe she didn't. She reached for the towel and began to prepare his bath, just as she had done yesterday. David had already left for the office. The staff spoke in low tones, moving quickly through their duties. The mansion was still too quiet, the kind of quiet that carries memories no one wants to remember. When the water was ready, Emma placed Noah in the basin. His skin was soft, his small fingers curled. She dipped the cloth into the water and began wiping him slowly, talking to him as if he could understand. "You know, my little one," she said, smiling sadly, "you remind me of someone I lost. But I think you're trying to tell me something." She lifted the cloth, letting a few drops of water slide across his forehead. His eyes blinked again. Then she noticed something different. His lips moved slightly. She leaned closer, barely breathing. It came again, faint and broken. "Moma." Her whole body went still. Tears gathered in her eyes. "Noah," she whispered, "did you just—" But the sound stopped. The baby's face relaxed again, still and quiet. Emma sat there, frozen for a long time. She wanted to scream for joy, but fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if she imagined it out of grief? She had lost her own baby not long ago. Maybe her mind was playing tricks on her. That night, she wrote it down in her notebook again. He blinked and whispered today. She looked at the words until they blurred in her tears. The following days passed quietly. Each morning, Emma repeated the same bath routine, and each time, Noah responded a little more. He blinked faster, made faint sounds, even turned his head slightly when she spoke. The other maids didn't notice. They came in, cleaned, and left quickly. To them, Noah was still a blind baby who would never see or react, But Emma knew something was changing. One afternoon, as she was folding laundry in the hallway, she overheard two staff members whispering. "She's too attached to that child," one said. The other replied, "Mr. Carter doesn't like anyone interfering. The doctors said the boy will never recover." Emma kept folding the clothes, pretending not to hear. But inside, her heart ached. She wasn't trying to interfere. She was just trying to see what others refused to see. Later that evening, the nurse arrived to give Noah his medicine. Emma watched quietly as the woman took out a small bottle of eye drops, the label faded and the glass old. The nurse tilted the baby's head and placed 2 drops into each eye. Noah whimpered softly, his tiny face scrunching up. When the nurse left, Emma picked up the bottle and turned it in her hand. The print was so faint she could barely read it. But one thing caught her eye, the date. It was expired, almost a year old. Her heart sank. "This can't be right," she murmured. She set the bottle down and stared at Noah. "How long have they been using this on you?" That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed with her phone, searching quietly. Her fingers trembled as she typed the name printed on the label. The results made her chest tighten. The medicine was used to treat light sensitivity, but when used too often, it could blur vision or cause temporary blindness. She whispered to herself. "So he wasn't born blind?" Her voice cracked. "They made him blind." The next morning, she didn't tell anyone. She wanted to be sure first. She bathed Noah again, but this time she waited before letting the nurse come. She wanted to see how long it would take before the drops wore off. By mid-morning, Noah's eyes began to move more than usual. When the sunlight hit his face, he blinked quickly. She waved her hand slowly in front of him, and to her shock, his tiny eyes followed. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth, tears flooding her eyes. "You can see, can't you?" she whispered. "Oh my God, you can see!" Noah made a faint giggle, a sound so pure it broke the silence of the nursery. Emma laughed softly through her tears. "It's okay, baby. It's okay." But her joy quickly turned into fear. What if the staff found out she had delayed the medicine? What if they told David? He might think she was meddling. She had no proof yet, only what she'd seen. That evening, when David came home, she stood in the nursery doorway, watching him. He sat by the crib, brushing his son's small hand with his fingers. "Hi, buddy," he said softly. "Daddy's here." For the first time, Noah moved his head toward the sound of his father's voice. David froze. Emma's heart stopped. She could see confusion and fear in his eyes. But Noah's head tilted again, and his little lips curved into the faintest smile. David blinked fast, as if he couldn't believe what he saw. "Emma," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off Noah, "did you see that?" She stepped forward slowly, trying to keep her voice calm. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I've been seeing it for days now. I think Noah might not be blind." David looked at her sharply. "That's impossible. The doctors confirmed it." "I know," she said, "but I also know what I've seen. He reacts to light, he follows movement, and he smiled today, sir." He stared at her for a long time, his jaw tight, his eyes full of disbelief and something else, hope. Then he stood up, trying to steady his voice. "Don't say a word about this to anyone, not yet. I need to see it with my own eyes." Emma nodded quietly. When he left, she picked Noah up and whispered, "You did so well today. Your daddy saw you, didn't he?" The baby cooed softly, his small hands reaching toward the light spilling through the curtains. Emma kissed his forehead and smiled through tears. For the first time since she arrived, she felt a flicker of peace. The truth was closer now, closer than ever. She didn't know what was coming, but one thing was clear: the world was about to see what love and attention could reveal, even when science had given up. Morning sunlight filled the Carter mansion, falling across the marble floor like gold ribbons. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. Emma stood beside Noah's crib, watching the tiny rise and fall of his chest. He was sleeping peacefully, one hand resting near his face. She smiled softly, remembering how he had smiled at his father the night before. It was the first time she had seen life on David's face. The first time the mansion had felt a little less cold. She picked up her notebook from the bedside table and opened it. Each page was filled with notes, dates, small reactions, the days she noticed blinking or sounds. She had written everything down because deep down she knew this day would come, the day when the truth could no longer be hidden. Downstairs, David was pacing the living room. He hadn't slept much. What Emma said last night kept echoing in his mind. He reacts to light. He follows movement. It sounded impossible, but he had seen it with his own eyes. Noah had turned his head toward his voice. He smiled. That single smile had shaken everything he believed. David poured himself a cup of coffee but barely touched it. He walked toward the window and stared at the ocean beyond the cliffs. If she's right, he muttered, then all these months. His voice faded. The thought of his son living in darkness because of someone's mistake filled him with anger and guilt. When he finally walked upstairs, he stopped at the nursery door. Emma was bathing Noah again, humming softly. She didn't notice him standing there. Her movements were gentle and patient. Noah cooed softly as the warm water touched his skin. Then it happened again. The baby blinked. David's eyes widened. He stepped closer quietly, afraid to break the moment. Emma moved her hand slowly, and Noah's eyes followed the motion. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "That's it, my love. Follow the sound." David took another step, his heart thudding. "Emma?" he said softly. She turned, startled. The towel slipped slightly from her hand. "Sir, I didn't hear you come in." But before either of them could say another word, Noah's lips moved. A faint sound escaped, "Mommy." The word hung in the air like a miracle. David froze, his breath caught in his throat. Did he just— "Yes," Emma whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He did." David knelt beside the basin, his hands shaking as he looked at his son. "Noah," he said, his voice breaking. "Can you hear me?" The baby's head turned toward his voice again. Then he smiled. David's eyes filled with tears. He reached out, touching his son's tiny hand. "You can see me," he whispered, half laughing, half crying. Emma wiped her eyes quickly. "I told you, sir," she said softly. "I think he can see and hear. It started days ago. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure." David looked up at her. "But how? The doctors? The tests?" She hesitated, then picked up the old bottle of eye drops from the table. "I think it's this, sir. These drops have been used on him every day. They're expired. When I looked up the name, I found they can cause blurred vision or even temporary blindness if overused." David took the bottle from her and read the faded label. His face went pale. "This can't be real," he said, shaking his head. "This was prescribed by Dr. Harris." "I'm sorry," Emma whispered, "but I believe that's what kept him blind all this time. When I delayed the drops for a few hours, he reacted to light again. The more time passed, the more he saw." David stood up suddenly, his voice low and full of anger. "How could this happen? How could no one notice?" Emma looked down. "Sometimes people don't look close enough, sir. They see what they expect to see." He stared at her for a long moment, his chest rising and falling heavily. Then he turned to Noah, who was still smiling up at him. The small boy's eyes followed David's hand as he waved it gently in front of him. A deep silence filled the room. Then David whispered, "You're not blind, my son. You were never blind." He pulled Noah gently into his arms, holding him close. Tears fell freely down his face as the baby touched his father's cheek. "I'm so sorry," he said through his tears. "I should have seen you. I should have known." Emma stood quietly beside them, her own tears falling. The moment felt sacred, like something only love could have created. After a long while, David placed Noah back in his crib and turned to Emma. "I need to find out who gave those drops and why. I want every medical file, every record, everything that doctor ever touched." "I'll help you, sir," Emma said softly. "I'll write everything I've seen, every small change, every reaction. You'll have proof." David nodded, still trying to steady himself. "You've done more than anyone else could," he said quietly. "If you hadn't noticed, my son would have grown up in darkness." Emma shook her head. I just did what any mother would do." Those words hit him deeply. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. There was pain in her eyes, but also kindness. "You've lost someone too, haven't you?" he asked. Her lips trembled. "My baby," she whispered. "A few months ago. He didn't make it." David's expression softened. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Emma wiped her tears and smiled weakly. "It's all right, sir. Maybe I was meant to be here with Noah." David looked back at his son, who was now playing with the edge of the blanket. "Maybe you were," he said. Later that evening, after everyone had gone to bed, David sat in his study with the bottle of drops on his desk. He opened Noah's medical file and flipped through the pages. One name appeared again and again: Dr. William Harris. A memory flashed in his mind. The doctor's confident voice saying, "He will never see again." David's jaw tightened. He searched the internet for the doctor's name, and what he found made his stomach twist. Dr. Harris's medical license had been suspended months ago for unethical experiments on infants. He leaned back in his chair, gripping the bottle tightly. "You did this," he whispered, his voice filled with rage. "You stole my son's sight." He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark sea. "Not anymore," he said under his breath. "Tomorrow, everything changes." Upstairs, Emma was sitting by Noah's crib, humming softly as the baby slept peacefully. The night air was cool, the room quiet except for the sound of waves. She didn't know what David had discovered downstairs, but she felt something shifting. For the first time since she arrived, the mansion didn't feel haunted. It felt alive again, as if hope had found its way back through the door. And as Noah stirred in his sleep, his tiny fingers reached toward the light that peeked through the curtains. The morning sun spread across the ocean, painting the waves with shades of gold. Inside the Carter mansion, there was a stillness that felt different, no longer the heavy silence of sorrow, but the quiet before change. David stood by the window, the old bottle of eye drops still in his hand. He had not slept all night. Every word from the files kept echoing in his mind. Dr. William Harris, suspended for unethical treatment of infants. His heart burned with anger. But more than anger, he felt guilt. For months, he had believed his son was lost, when all along, his trust in the wrong people had kept him blind. He turned when he heard soft footsteps. Emma stood at the doorway, holding Noah in her arms. The baby was smiling, reaching for the light coming through the curtains. For a moment, David could not speak. He just stared, watching his son's eyes follow the sunlight. "He sees the light now," Emma said softly. "He keeps reaching for it." David swallowed hard and nodded. "We're going to make sure he never lives in darkness again." That same afternoon, he made several phone calls. He contacted his lawyers, demanded every document linked to the medicine, and requested a full investigation into the doctor's records. When one of the lawyers hesitated, saying it could cause a scandal, David's voice grew firm. "Then let it. I want the world to know what they did to my son." Days passed, each one bringing more light into the house. Noah's laughter now filled the rooms. He reacted to colors, followed moving toys, and reached for mirrors with wide curiosity. Emma turned his therapy sessions into playtime. She placed colored balls on the floor, guided him toward them, and clapped softly whenever he crawled closer. The more he played, the more he responded. David often stood by the door, watching in silence. Each smile from Noah was like a wound and a miracle at the same time. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit by his son's crib and whisper, "I'm sorry for not seeing you sooner, my boy." One morning, Dr. Grace Thompson, a new specialist, arrived at the mansion. She was calm, professional, and kind. She examined Noah carefully, testing his eyes, shining gentle light, watching his reactions. After a long moment, she smiled. "He has partial vision, Mr. Carter," she said. "And with therapy and time, it can continue to improve." David exhaled shakily, his eyes wet. "You mean he can recover?" "Yes," she said, nodding. "He already is. Whoever cared for him did something right." David turned to Emma, who stood quietly in the corner, her hands clasped. "It was her," he said softly. She saw what none of us did." Dr. Thompson smiled. "Then I'd say you both saved him." Later that evening, as the house settled, Emma went to her small room to rest. She had no idea that the story was already spreading beyond the mansion. The lawyers had filed the case, and soon, reporters began to call. Headlines appeared everywhere. "California Maid uncovers false blindness diagnosis." Cameras crowded outside the gate, but Emma avoided them all. When one reporter managed to ask her for a statement, she simply said, "This story isn't about me. It's about a little boy who finally saw his father." The case grew fast. Families across the country came forward with similar stories, babies who had suffered from the same drug. The company responsible tried to deny it, but David's lawyers had gathered proof: Emma's notes, the expired bottle, the test results, and even the doctor's recorded statements. In court, the tension was thick. Reporters filled the seats. David sat beside Emma, holding her notebook as evidence. When she was called to testify, she stood nervously, her voice gentle but steady. "I am not a doctor," she said, "and I didn't do anything special. I just paid attention. He wasn't blind, he just needed someone to see him differently." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the courtroom was silent. Then it was David's turn. His voice broke several times as he spoke. "I trusted people who said my son would never see. I accepted it because I was afraid to hope again. But this woman," he said, turning to Emma, "showed me that hope isn't something you buy or prescribe. It's something you notice." The evidence was overwhelming. Dr. William Harris was found guilty of negligence and fraud. The pharmaceutical company was fined and ordered to reform its products and practices. When the verdict was read, David held Emma's hand quietly. Neither of them smiled. They just sat there, both in tears, knowing justice had finally been served. Weeks later, peace returned to the Carter mansion. The ocean breeze felt softer, the air warmer. Noah was crawling now, laughing loudly whenever Emma clapped her hands. David often joined them, lying on the floor beside his son, showing him bright toys, watching his eyes light up with every new color. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the water, David placed a photo frame on his desk, a picture of Noah holding a shiny red ball, his eyes bright and alive. Beneath it, he wrote a single line: "Love sees what medicine sometimes cannot." Months later, an invitation arrived. The California Children's Foundation was hosting a ceremony in Los Angeles to honor families and caregivers who inspired hope. David read the letter aloud at the dinner table. "They want to honor Noah," he said softly. "And they want to honor you, Emma." Her eyes widened. "Me?" He nodded. "You saved him. You deserve this." The night of the ceremony was bright and full of emotion. The hall was packed with families, doctors, and volunteers. When Noah's name was called, David carried him to the stage. The audience clapped, many wiping tears from their eyes. The host smiled warmly and said, "Tonight we also honor the woman who saw what no one else did, Emma Williams." Emma walked to the stage, trembling. When she reached David and Noah, the baby looked up, smiled, and said clearly, "Mommy." Gasps filled the hall, followed by a wave of applause. Tears streamed down Emma's face as she knelt beside Noah, hugging him close. The host placed a silver medal around her neck and said, "For seeing what no one else saw." The crowd stood, clapping through tears. Cameras flashed, but for Emma, the world disappeared. All she saw was Noah's smile and the light in his eyes. After the ceremony, they returned to Riverside. The mansion no longer felt like a house of grief. It was alive again with laughter, light, and healing. Each morning, Noah crawled toward the window where the sunlight poured in, and Emma would whisper, "See the world, my little one. It's yours now." David would stand quietly behind them, watching with a grateful heart. He had learned that day that real miracles don't always come from medicine or wealth. Sometimes they come from love, from kindness, and from someone brave enough to look a little closer. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that sometimes the greatest miracles don't come from wealth, science, or power, but from love, care, and the courage to look deeper. A baby who was once thought to be blind finally saw the world because one woman refused to stop believing. Her kindness changed not only a child's life but inspired an entire nation to open their eyes to hope. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs faith today, and subscribe for more emotional and inspiring stories that remind us of the power of compassion. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what lesson you learned from this story. Because sometimes, one act of love can open more eyes than all the medicine in the world.